Good afternoon, gentlemen. I just want to let you guys know that today we're going to be speaking with Dr. Ben Wenner from the Columbus campus. Dr. Wenner got his Bachelor of Science from Michigan State in beef and dairy nutrition research, did his Master's of Science at The Ohio State University in swine, and then did his PhD at The Ohio State University for dairy nutrition. You said at your house you guys run a small flock of Hampshire cross sheep. That you're also very active in 4-H. So I like to hear those things. We also have soon to be Dr. Brady Campbell,
Yeah.
which hopefully the next couple months you'll be able to finish that out and become the Dr. Campbell. You've actually got a lot of hats you wear at Ohio State. You've got your program coordinator for the OSU sheep team. You co-director of the Scotland Ruminant Study Abroad team. You're on the board of directors for the Ohio Sheep Improvement Association, president of the Texel Sheep Breeder Society, the National Sheep Improvement Program Texel board director or breed director, and then your family runs about 300 sheep. So you probably are one of the busier people that I know as far as all the different things you do. Now, the other thing is you both have taught the small ruminant production management course on the Columbus campus, and either lectured or taught depending on the semester. And I think that's nice to have both of you guys here just to get a little bit different perspective. So the discussion that I wanted to have is talking about breeds, and I was looking through the um, the American Sheep Industry Association book, the SID, and I had a student that was saying they were overwhelmed at all the breeds they had to learn. And I started counting, and in the book and in the older version, there's 49 breeds of sheep that they say are common or semi-common in the United States. Now, Ohio's claim to fame, we are the #1 purebred sheep state. We're the biggest state as production for east of the Mississippi, but we have too many damn breeds. So what I want to do is get some of this narrowed down and get your guys' ideas on some things. First, I want to ask Dr. Wenner, what brought you to the sheep industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we used to actually have cattle. We used to run Semitols, and we live just north of Columbus. So as property shrinks, it's harder and harder to have a decent size of cattle herd, whereas it's easier and easier to justify switching to a smaller animal. So with the amount of space we had available, we made the switch actually right when I went to college. So I didn't grow up showing sheep. I grew up showing cattle. And then my siblings got into Shropshires and showed Shropshires. And then my wife was big in polypays. And so we started with polypays and migrated through some Suffolk crosses to the Hampshires, which is where we are now. And they're nice. They're peaceful. They eat the grass. I don't have to mow it. My neighbors think they're amazing. They still sometimes think they're goats, but that's the joy of living in town.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily call that a joy, but I understand that. So, and then Brady, I know your family, you've got a background in sheep, but what brought you to where you are now?
Yeah, just born and raised in it down there in the hills of southeastern Ohio. We've had sheep on our farm for well over 100 years, starting with my great grandfather, and it just came secondhand for me. I was out in the barn pretty close to day one. I know that the story goes that about 2 weeks I was able to go out with my dad. We've got hogs as well. I was in the hog house. I was in the sheep barn, and there's several pictures of me with baby lambs at the county fairs with them. So just a real passion for our small ruminants.
Awesome. Talking about all these darn breeds we have, how do you guys recommend somebody that's new to the industry? How would you guys tell them to look at a breed and try to decide what fits them?
Yeah, I mean, I just lectured on this, I suppose today's Wednesday, yesterday. And I start by telling students who are by definition new to the industry to identify what the goal is. And once you've identified your goal or your farm, then you can work your way backwards to what breeds might be desirable. And I think too many people make the mistake of picking their favorite breed based on appearance, kind of like picking your favorite painted pony. and then not asking yourself what the purpose of that pony is going to be afterwards.
Okay. Brady?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just to echo Dr. Winter there, understand what your goals of your operation are. Where do you want, and also take a look into the markets that you have available to you. Are you going to go niche marketing? Or are you going to go purebred livestock? And really understand where you're going to get the premium at. It's certainly all right to get these breeds if it's just a hobby piece and you have no other interest besides that, just to have the breed for itself and to preserve the breed, but really understand what its main intention is for.
I like those answers. That's kind of what I tell my students as well. I use the example that there's a farm on the East Coast that I've seen in print quite a few times that they've got one of the weirdest breeds. They've got a little primitive runty thing, but they're making their dollars for their entire farm on this little sheep. But they're selling small carcasses, they're selling premium wool, and then they're also selling the horns. They're slicing and making into natural buttons, and they're making money with those as well. And these are niches I would have never thought of, and it's something that they found a niche and they're working that niche well. So, um, as far as I like to, when I'm telling students about breeds, I usually try to classify them in different groups. So we either talk about hair sheep or we talk about wool sheep, or I prefer to actually break them down into sire breeds and maternal lines. How do you guys actually look at clustering sheep or sorting them?
Yeah, I like to talk about the terminal and maternal side of things. I typically split them between blackface and whiteface breeds. And then being kind of from the wool background, I like to further segregate the wool breeds between fine, medium, and coarse.
And then you've got some Lincoln. So what are your thoughts on carpet wool and some of those long wool breeds?
Yeah, certainly a place for it in the industry. Unfortunately, commercial wool production, or the price for being paid for commercial wool, is quite low or non-existent. But that's just the fact of our industry at the moment. There's certainly a place for it. Those coarse wools or carpet wools are good for high traffic areas. They can also be utilized in different ways in terms of insulation for houses or even our garments that we wear.
And Ben?
Yeah, I break them down by white face and colored face because we've got the red face now, and I have to give credence to the Tunis because I know people who would be unhappy if I didn't. I'm not sure that they belong with the black face sheep, but that's a different problem. But I usually break them down that way and make the generalization of the terminal versus the maternal, and I think that we have to be careful about that because there's seems more exceptions to the rule by the year, and so. And anymore, I've also encouraged students to think about which sheep have more dominance within our region, and really focus on maybe outside breeds versus the breeds that I would consider to have more prevalence or that are United States derived. So newer versus older breeds, and I don't get too far into the wool. For me, it's either fine or it's Lincoln.
Crap.
And everything in between, I just tell them to worry about throwing it away. At least with the really long, curly Lincoln style wool or the Leicester, you can find some hand spinners that want to take that and put it to work. So it's, in my opinion, it's actually probably not as trashy as the middle of the road stuff that we're going to pull off of our crossbreds.
I would agree with that.
I,
There we go. I've said my one nice thing for the day. I'm done.
Done with it.
I used to raise alpacas, and we always sold the wool. Well, it's actually fiber, but we sold the fiber at a higher price if we actually would talk to hand spinners, and we were selling a premium fleece for $25 to $30, unwashed. They just had to come pick it up, and that same stuff, if I would have sent it to any of the accumulating places or any of the small mills, I'd have gotten $5 or $6 for it. So I'm a big fan of utilizing those hand spinners and the fiber guilds. And the nice thing about Ohio is we have 88 counties, and I believe last check, I think there were 86 fiber guilds available in Ohio. So there's definitely that little niche that you can find if you look for it.
Yeah.
Now, now
Oh,
I'm sorry, Ben, what were you gonna say?
I was going to say a little side question for you. It really troubles me when we think about alpacas that what I was reading was about 80% of alpacas were growing fiber that's very similar to sheep wool. and only about 20% of it is kind of that really unique alpaca fiber. But it's so much easier to shear a sheep than an alpaca, at least in my experience. So
See, and I would say the opposite. I find it easier to shear alpacas than sheep. I could never get my footwork down correctly when shearing sheep. I hate shearing sheep.
okay,
Um,
all right,
And
the
I love it.
alpacas, see, for the alpacas and the llamas, we actually stretch them out Superman style.
Hmm.
So I've got a pulley system, and you have one person hold their head. You tie their front feet to a pole. You put the back feet on the pulley. You run, and they're stretched out tight. They can't go anywhere. The person holding the head slowly rolls them, and you just sit in one spot and you keep going back and forth. They're shorn in a couple of minutes, and you're done. So they scream the whole time. They spit a lot, but but as far as my knees and my back go, I'll take the alpaca shearing.
Man, sheep
okay.
shearing keeps you humble though.
No, it keeps me hunched over and I can't move for 2 days afterwards. I'm not as good as Greg as far as, I mean, he does, thousands a year. I do one every 3 years and throw my back out every time. So um, Ben, you said something about regional stuff as far as looking at the region. Why do you think that is important when you're looking at breeds?
Well, if you're going down the purebred trail, which arguably may not be a good decision in the first place, I would say that be careful about what you sacrifice when you go purebred versus what you can gain by picking breeds that have strengths and incorporating them. But if you go down the purebred trail, one of the big things that comes out in the wash and you don't think about it when you first get started is where's the closest neighbor that has genetics that you want to use? How far are you going to be driving every single time you got to track stuff down? Um, Animals of a similar breed that that we have kind of congregated in certain regions. Generally, that means we have a better established market for them as well. We're going to have shows. I don't know why you own a purebred animal if you're not somehow invested in the show side of things too. And it's not very fun to go to a show and be the only person and win first place in a class of 1. Right? I don't get a lot of joy out of that. I'd rather lose a class of 10. So I think there's a lot to be said for being involved in a breed that has a larger following.
Which that actually spins into my next question I had, which is genetics. If we look at some of the reports on livestock improvement, the sheep industry they say is about 20 years behind the cattle industry when it comes to genetics. And the next question I'm going to ask is actually a spinoff of this, which is just as an aside, the dairy goat industry they're claiming is about 40 years behind in genetic improvement compared to the cattle industry. And none of them are anywhere as good as the poultry and the swine industry as far as improvement goes. But when we're talking about genetic improvement in sheep, I get real frustrated when I hear people say, "Oh yeah, I bought a ram from Billy Bob. He's down the road, 6 miles." And it just frustrates me that they're selecting genetics not based on quality, but they're selecting the next generation's genetics on convenience to pick up those genetics. And what's your thought on that?
Well, I'll go first so Brady can do cleanup because this might get ugly. But
I hope so. I hope so.
I would tell you that I'm not even really a big believer in AI from a sheep perspective. And I realize there's genetic value there, but the the additional cost versus the potential return on genetic improvement in sheep is not the same thing as the cost in return that we had on beef or dairy cattle. We've seen what's happened to the beef breeds, and we've really seen the degradation or the erosion of some of those breeds that I would have considered to be the standard for quality cattle. We've seen the way that the gene pool is narrowed in the dairy industry, and I think we have to be really careful about how much you narrow it with genotyping and selection. And on the sheep side of things, it's really hard really to talk me into investing in a $20,000 ram that might tomorrow decide to lay over and die just for fun. Right. And I think there's a different type of animal that we're working with here. It's more of a cleanup animal, and maybe that's not glorious, but the cleanup animal needs to have a margin associated with every single head rather than the risk that we've taken on with some of our larger livestock. And so are we 20 years behind? Yeah, we could be more than 20 years behind. That actually sounds generous. I'm more than 20 years behind, and I don't like it when you select genetics based on convenience. Certainly, you should be doing your homework and searching out record keeping data. We don't even have. You can't even guarantee me that I can find 4 or 5 people to market me a Hampshire Ram that have record keeping within what I would consider to be acceptable accuracy, let alone the genotype or the pedigree. And there's a lot of twisted things going on in the background there too. And coming from
No,
the Shropshire industry, I've seen all sorts of perversions to genetics.
no. Everyone knows that there's no dishonesty in the livestock industry as pedigrees go, and as far as who we say they are is who we say they are. Just don't do any genotype testing to find out.
Yeah, well, it's very difficult to ever be less than 20 years behind if we can't even be honest about our data.
I agree. All right,
Yeah,
Brady,
that's
jump in there with both feet, man. Let's do this.
the reality of it is when we talk about purchasing these rams, you pay for what you get. The mentality of a lot of our sheep producers being of the older generation is that they just need a functional male, 2 testicles, and something that's going to settle some ewes. And to do that, it may be the option down the road. It may be that call ram that somebody else got rid of at the sale barn where they can pick it up really cheap. But then again, are you doing yourself any justice? I understand Dr. Wenner's point coming from the standpoint, are we really getting a return on this investment? But working with some of the purebreds that I've been with, especially, I guess coming from the Texel side of things, we started getting involved with NSIP. I've been able to improve what I think the genetics and the growth and the performance of my sheep, and we've been able to get a premium off of that. The beauty of that is that we can demonstrate that we've got an increase in rate of gain. We got an increase in size of loin eye. And although we're not selling these sheep on the rail and maybe not grading them, you can visually see it. And you can also, it's pretty easy to track date of birth to date of sale. And I think that's really where some of those improvements come from when you take a look at some of those production efficiencies. Think about today with corn hovering around what, $5 a bushel. Do you want to spend that extra money to feed those lambs out and more than likely not get the return on your investment there due to the high cost of feed? Or would you rather spend a couple $100 extra on a ram that is, got data behind him and shows you that he will get those lambs to market without that extra feed needed?
But how
The
many of these?
difficulty becomes the amount of body weight gain you'd have to achieve to save anything substantial in corn. And I would agree, Brady, that the NSIP data and those data driven flocks, they're really nice. They don't always look nice, kind of like our dollar value Angus we go and look at, but they pay off. What troubles me is they started that NSIP sale in Worcester how many years ago now? 4 or 5.
Yes.
The participation is still discouragingly low, and so what that tells me is that there's really poor adoption of what I consider to be the best hope for widespread genetic improvement.
I agree. And we've had some discussions through NSIP of why that's occurring. We still don't have a good answer. Perhaps people aren't interested in the data or behind the numbers. And I think part of it, what I've seen just through my own personal experience, you have to evaluate these animals both on paper and in physical appearance. There's too many times that these animals have really good values and a lot of good data backing behind them, but they can't walk. They can't function. And we got to have these animals be structurally sound. And I think, unfortunately, some of those scenarios have turned some of the people away.
I think those are some pretty good points. Now, Brady, you made a comment. I don't know if this was intentional or unintentional, but you said the older generation doesn't want to do stuff. Right now in Ohio, the average sheep farmer, I believe the number I last saw was the average farmer is 63, which tells us that 50% of those people are over 63. So when you say the older generation, you're talking about over 50% of that population of producers.
Right.
So was that an intentional dig at the old people? Or was
Not
this
necessarily an intentional dig. It's just it's a matter of fact.
okay? What do you mean? Because I am curious on that.
I guess to be quite blunt, I can talk about my grandfather. I mean, it's myself and my brother, and then we've got my father, and we got my grandfather, and he is less apt to adopt anything that we may be more willing to try. He's had 70, 80 years of experience in raising sheep. He's done it one specific way, and he'll continue doing that way until he no longer has sheep. And you won't be able to convince those kind of folks otherwise. Fortunately for my father, I've been able to convince him through some of the research that we've done here at Ohio State to change some of our management practices at home and improve some of our operation efficiencies. So I think it's adoption to change, and sometimes it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks.
Okay. Um, okay. This is going to be another personal one. I'm going to start with Brady because I'm curious on his answer, and I think Dr. Wenner is going to be a little bit of a different view on this one. So I'm curious on this one is um, not what breed is best for you. What breed is best for Ohio?
Oh, what breed is best for Ohio?
If you
That's
had to,
kind
if
of
you had
a
to pick a
loaded
single
question.
breed,
If I had to pick a single
you have
breed,
to pick a single breed. I'll even do a two-parter, single breed, and I'll let you do a single breed with an additional terminal sire if you want to
with
go
additional,
crossbreds.
if I wanted to go crossbreds, I like the. I'm trying to think. It's certainly going to be a white face breed if I'm going to go to like the commercial setting and I want high prolificacy. Part of me wants to say Dorset. I really like the advantages of the Dorset in terms of size, especially the Australian variety or genetics like the ones we have at our Eastern Research Station. The only problem that I have with the Dorsets is a lot of issues with their feet. Foot rot, hoof rot, with those white hooves on them. Part of me also says maybe a polypay, but I think if we're strictly saying one breed, I'd really like to go with the Dorsets. They're really versatile, in my opinion. When we talk about maternal and terminal, Dorset seems to come up in both of those varieties. Throughout the Dorset Association, I think they've got the greatest span in terms of types and kinds of Dorset. You've got your framey fitted Dorsets, you've got your horn Dorsets, and you've got your weather type Dorsets. So I think a really nice combination using some of those genetics. And I'm biased. I'm going to say if I was able to use a terminal sire, it would certainly be the Texel on top of them to get a really nice prime lamb being able to be produced. I just sent a couple fall born lambs that were Texels, purebred Texels, and we topped the market at $4 a pound last week. So there's certainly value in those types of animals.
See, and I would have to agree with a Dorset, but I'm a softie for Dorsets. When I first started showing sheep, I had Suffolk Cordell crosses, and they were the worst moms I ever had. Switched over to purebred Dorsets. They hit the ground running. I loved them. So if I had to have one breed today, I wouldn't think of anything. Well, maybe you could talk me into a polypay, maybe. But I'd almost have to go with the Dorset for what you said, the range of options within that breed. Um,
You
Dr.
bet.
Winter.
Yeah, so I may not be as far off as you think. I would agree that the Dorsets have an advantage. I would argue that at this point, foot rot just is what it is, and you manage through it regardless of species. Especially the last few years, as the climate has been much wetter. I think that the foot rot or other foot issues have prevailed more than I would like, and it's been a real struggle and frustration. So at this point, I don't feel like you can select a breed specifically for that, or if there is one. But maybe we should be focusing on selecting within our flock against those that are most susceptible. We've got Dorsets across the road here at my folks, and they do drop them on the ground, and they do hit them running. I was surprised to have Hampshire crosses that are dropping twins and triplets, and have Dorsets over there dropping singles and twins. I don't get real excited about that. If I've got to breed a sheep and run it the year round, I want to drop two on the ground every time. And I've shown Brady before, I really like to drop these 16-pound twins. Right? So if I can drop 30 pounds of lamb on the ground and have them on feed in a week, I get pretty excited about that.
But how big are those moms that do that?
Now over 200.
Okay.
250. And I didn't get there with a straight Hampshire or a straight Suffolk. We migrated a bit, and we probably have, on average, a 16th polypay buried down in there. And I do favor the polypay. So if I had, and some of that I think is my exposure because that's what my wife grew up with. But I'm very comfortable with them, and I think that The trouble is we don't all experience or see the same polypays. There are some polypay flocks that can be really inspiring. There are some polypay flocks that you might like to just drive by and not stop and see. And so I think there's maybe not a lot of equity across those flocks. But if I was to take a polypay and then run a Hampshire terminal on that, run a bunch of brockles out of that, I'd be pretty happy.
Now, I've noticed in the last, I'm going to show my age again, but the last 20, 25 years, it was Suffolk, Suffolk, Suffolk as far as the terminal crosses. And there's several breeders I know that they've had Suffolk crosses for the last 25 years, but in the last 5 years, they've said they're now all Hamp crosses. Why are we migrating away from either this? I don't know if it's this, and I honestly don't know this, if it's the Suffolk name or if we're actually migrating away from the Suffolk breed. And why are we focusing more on the Hamps?
They might be the same sheep, just with different papers. It's possible.
I'm not going to say that I have seen people that use Just for Men hair dye to dye the tops of the top knots on some of those purebred Suffolks, because that would be wrong. But seriously, what is your thought about why are we moving towards the Hamp more as the terminal?
The Hamp is probably more moderately framed for certain. I think the Suffolks ran away from us. So the same way that we ran those continental beef cattle up in the 90s, and you're running 1,600, 1,700 pound animals across the scales, those Suffolks got huge. And along with that, we started having a lot of our scrapie risk, and we weren't monitoring that very well. We all went through the spider lamb plague where we hadn't tracked that very well. Again, this all goes back to record keeping and a little bit of honesty. And I think all of those things really, really discouraged people from buying into that. And I think you have, from a youth standpoint, you have many active, successful organizations to plug kids into. And I think a lot of the original push with the Suffolks was the Angus of the sheep industry. And there was a lot of youth activities, shows, largest number of registrations that had a lot of momentum. Then it just, bigger wasn't necessarily better, but bigger was what we chased. I've been down there to Nail and seen some animals that could probably eat me for lunch on the stands waiting to go in, especially some of those yearling ewes. They're huge.
Yeah,
And
I've got a friend that's got a Suffolk ram that he's about 5.5 feet tall at the top of his head, and he weighs 450.
yeah, every
It's
bit
a
of
small
4.
pony.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
the Shetland
And-
pony. That's what I think when I hear the Suffolk breed.
Well, think about the maintenance energy that's associated with an animal that large, right? So that's why I've tried to really dial ours down, in that we were at 250, 275, and I'm trying to tone them into about 2.25, because it does save me a bit of feed. And I could trace that on the data, but they're not purebreds, so nobody wants my data anyway. But the goal is to drop those 15-pound twins, get them on feed 6 weeks, and get them out the door. And I can do that by crossing a smaller animal, a Hamp. There's a lot of Hamps available, cast off from the club industry, that are phenotypically acceptable.
Okay, Brady, what's your thought on that?
It is valid, and I appreciate that Dr. Wenner is trying to scale some of those ewes back. I was going to question, 250-pound ewe having 15-pound twins. I can show you the data where some of our Texels are having twins that are weighing 12 to 14 pound a piece, and they're weighing $1.25, $1.50. So a lot less in terms of maintenance costs and even cost of feed to be able to run those type of sheep. I might be able to run 1.5 ewes compared to some of those larger ewes. So
The difference is I got to sell mine to a 4-H'er for a show.
fair enough. Fair enough. I'm trying to sell all the rams I can to the Katahdin breeders of this nation.
I did see a Texel at the show last year, a crossbred. I've seen one.
Nice.
And when you cross that Texel up to a larger one, I remember asking you a few years ago how they even managed to get a Hampshire ewe bred.
Hey,
you find the ditch, right?
Thanks for going there, Brady. I was going to, but I was afraid to. And I'm glad you mentioned Katahdins, because the next question I had for you is, what's the future of the hair breeds?
They're up and coming. I know, talking from the side of NSIP, they're the most popular breed in NSIP. One, I think it's people really value the genetics, and it's a lot of people that really weren't involved in the sheep industry. They liked science. They wanted something to put into their backyard. Maybe they've got a hillside they don't want to mow. They don't want to shear the sheep. So definitely there is value in the ease of management of these hair breeds. As our climate changes in the south, I think we're going to see perhaps some of those wool breeds move north and allow more of those hair breeds to get in there simply due to the ease of management. No shearing. They seem to be a bit more resistant or less susceptible to parasitic infection. But the only downfall of the hair breeds is that they just lack an overall conformation and size in terms of muscling. So there is still benefit to our wool breeds. I've tracked a lot of data in terms of the markets as well. I like to use those over in New Holland, PA, for some of that data because they do break it down between hair sheep and wool sheep. And consistently, hair sheep lambs are bringing about 10 cents less per hundredweight, unless they're about that 60 to 80 pound range. Then we can see where those two types or styles of sheep bringing a very similar price. But the benefit is if we start putting some of these terminal wool breeds back into them, those F1 offspring, one, have more muscling, they may be heavier in terms of weight, and two, they get enough wool into that hair coat to make them appear not to be purebred hair sheep, and people are seen to get more of a premium out of those lambs as well.
But do you think the wool premium for pelts, because that's probably where some of that 20 cents or 10 cents less per hundredweight is probably coming from. Do you think that's worth it? I mean, is it worth chasing that pelt cost? Um,
Pelts
just what do
right
you?
now, pelts in the industry right now, it's costing $2 to $3 for the processors to get rid of them. We have
Mhm.
lost our pelt market. That's fallen through the bottom of the floor. So I think where the benefit is that they know that they've been crossbred with a hair or with a wool breed, and hopefully that wool breed has a bit more muscling characteristics to it. So I think that's where that benefit comes from, just overall conformation and muscling of that animal rather than the value of the pelt.
Okay, Dr. Winter.
Well, I really struggle with this because they're ugly. I did grow up driving past we have a really nice Dorper farm here in central Ohio, and growing up driving past that's fun to look at. I like the Dorpers. They're not technically strictly hair, but I do lump them in that category. And if I was going to chase one, that's a much more attractive sheep.
Less
I,
goat-like.
yeah, for me, the real struggle is if I'm going to have a Katahdin, I don't know why I wouldn't just have boar goats. If I want to run brush cleanup, I can run brush cleanup, and at least I could find some attractive boar goats, and I could work with those. There's the livestock judging side of me that just really struggles to have to look out the window at something that's incompatible with my picture of what happy, healthy livestock should look like. Those Katahdins can look rough.
Some of them, yeah. Um, do you think though that I know the Katahdin breeders are pushing real hard for parasite resistance research. I mean, they're doing some EPD work on those. Do you think that there's enough of a parasite resistance in those hair sheep to make them worthwhile for maybe not for Ohio where we actually have less parasite pressure than somewhere like northern Georgia or um, South Carolina? Kind of what Brady was saying was the wool sheep might move north and the hair sheep might move south. What are your
Yeah,
thoughts on
and
that?
I default everything parasites. I default to Brady. He can
Okay.
test that. I don't even touch it. He's my go-to guy.
That's a kind of a loaded question in terms of parasites, and I think it all really comes back to management. A lot of times when we have issues with parasites, it's due to poor management. And yes, there's a lot of value in being able to say, hey, some of these animals are more superior in terms of being less susceptible to parasites. But the reality is that we have this in all sheep breeds. There is some level of resistance. It may be more in some specific breeds, and we also have this differences who's going to become infected more often or less often, and so forth. So I think using that as a status to say, hey, I'm just going to throw these sheep out onto a pasture, let them grub it down all year long, is still ill-advised in terms of management. I think there's more factors that are involved than just genetics when it comes to parasite management.
Okay.
I think there's also the external parasite aspect, right?
Hmm.
There's probably some value on the hair animal from that standpoint, maybe a bit easier to manage around.
It could, yeah. I have not seen any research or any data on that, but it certainly could.
Couple more questions, real quick ones. This is like the lightning round. Um, Dr. Wenner, what's your favorite lamb recipe?
Oh, you know, I like to keep it simple. So a couple of years ago, I started teaching this class, and I'd listen to Dr. Cressman talk about cooking lamb, and he'll just take some oil, take a little bit of salt and pepper, and he always tells us that we need to put some of those herbs that have maybe a little bit of essential oil that serves as an antioxidant to protect against some oxidation while we're cooking. So, like a rosemary, for example, rub that all in there and throw it on and keep it clean and simple. And there's really nothing like a simple grilled lamb chop. Um, Now my next plan is to get into smoking stuff, but with all the butcher slots booked up for a long time, I'm just hanging tight. I've got a freezer full of beef, and we'll work through that first.
Don't you have a tree in your backyard?
I was going to
Yeah,
say that.
I did a deer not too long ago, and I kept all my fingers, which was a miracle given my recent flight. Um, and we actually did that one off the swing set, so we're real classy.
Hey,
If you ever want, I have pictures of butchering an alpaca from a swing set. So
Yeah,
um, we like to make things a little weird around our house. So we
that's what I usually highlight when I'm telling students about USDA inspected versus not USDA inspected meat.
yeah, we never told my daughter that her swing set was used for. Um, we held or hung an alpaca from it one year, and then another year we did a goat and a lamb from it. We never told her. She's 12.
It's
She's
a
fine not knowing.
it's the perfect height.
Yeah,
nice.
Brady, what's your favorite dish?
Yeah, just as Dr. Winter said, doing that quick and simple type of recipe with those lamb chops. Lamb chops by far my favorite, but to be a little bit different, I've got a recipe that I like to use. It's got a Greek Euro seasoning, and you make some lamb meatballs. So get them in a pan in the oven, about 375. Make sure you got them propped up so the grease drips down. And yeah, you can't beat anything more than a nice lamb chop with a lamb meatball.
See, and I'm going to go halfway between you guys as far as work goes. I'm a big fan of lamb chops marinated in balsamic vinaigrette dressing. Marinate for an hour and throw them on the grill. So, last question. What's the biggest problem in the sheep industry?
Besides record keeping,
Just one?
No, record keeping can be it because I think that's
I,
atrocious.
data and record keeping is just murderous. These associations will send you a book to write everything down. You can download free apps to track everything. You got Excel right on your phone. You can key them in. You don't even have to wash the afterbirth off your hand to key it in on your phone, right? But nobody does it, and it's atrocious. It's a good word.
Brady?
Yeah, I would agree with the data keeping, but I think from an industry-wide standpoint, we still need to support our lamb producers and understanding the importance of our lamb products. We import 60% of our consumable lamb products here in the United States. Yeah, as we know, we watch the market prices. Prices are high. There's still availability for more small ruminant producers to be involved in the game. So I think we just need more overall support in terms of numbers of animals here in the United States.
I agree with both of those. I will throw in one more, and it is varied product. We have too many breeds, too much variety and size. If I need a for a grocery store, say I need a truckload of rack of lamb that's a consistent size, it's New Zealand and Australia can ship it to me by next week.
Yep.
In Ohio, in the eastern U.S., I think the western U.S. Since they still have a fair amount of consistency with some of the crosses that they have on the western range. I think they're a little bit better with consistent product than we are. But I think the eastern part of the U.S. that we don't have consistent product. I'll blame your Texels.
That's fine.
He's used to it.
Gentlemen, this was a fun little thing to do. I appreciate it. If you guys are interested, I'm hoping in a couple weeks I'm going to have a young lady that was a OSU graduate that did her master's out west doing research with the terminal cross that the USDA has been working with, and she's got some data for us and trying to explain what maybe we need to look at some different options for terminal crosses. So, but like I said, it's been a great time. I appreciate you guys coming and doing this, and hopefully we'll get to do it again soon.
Yeah,
Sounds
thanks.
good. Thank
All right.
you.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.